Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Cacawphony. I am your host, Wolf. This week, and I am joined by...
Lexi.
Hey, I'm Jelo, and I'm not the host this week.
Hi, I'm Glucose. Hello.
Hello, and welcome. With all of that said, this week we are here to talk about the sexuality of RWBY. And I say it that way, knowing that that's going to turn a few heads, and I'm thinking about labeling the podcast with that name, this episode with that name as well, just because I know it's going to turn a few heads, because there is a vast difference between the word sexuality and the word sexualization. To disappoint those people who clicked on this thinking that it's going to be something much different, we're here to actually talk about the sexualization of RWBY.
There's still going to be some gay stuff, but...
Nah, never.
For the record, I did not approve this. But we're gonna do it anyways!
So, jumping into it to start off with, do you think RWBY, when it started out, was sexualized? Do you think it had sexualized designs, characters, or even character attitudes? And to keep it a little bit, I guess you'd say, and to narrow down our starting point, we'll say starting off with would be the trailers and the first volume. So looking at those two things, do you think RWBY was sexualized? Do you think it had sexualized designs, characters, or character attitudes, or personalities?
Certainly.
Yeah, I mean, the designs especially, I can't really think of any characters besides, early volumes Yang that had anything resembling a sexualized undertone.
Mm-hmm.
But, the designs, let's see, just thinking, Yang has the crop top with the jacket over it, Let's see, who's the other character? Because this is something that I harp on a lot. Shit. I'm sorry.
The twins?
Yeah, the twins, they fit the Lolita aesthetic. Pyrrha has the corset, which is innately, in my opinion, a sexualized piece of clothing, and you can't tell me different, but okay. There were very... not every character had a sexualized design. RWBY and Weiss had very wholesome designs, Velvet's design, I don't know how anybody... what is that? A jumpsuit?
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, the jumpsuit isn't even seen until 2, so I don't even think it could be counted as at the start.
Right. That's true.
But we do have
I thought they had said
Glenta.
one. I thought y'all said volume 1 and 2.
No, just the trailers in volume 1.
Yeah, I am sorry, everyone who's listening. I took a bunch of cough medicine, and I am currently these guys are all on Earth. I'm somewhere out on Jupiter, I think.
That's the best time to record an episode
Exactly.
with this kind of topic.
Yes.
Alright, I can't quite remember where it was, but I feel I remember Monty had said something about not wanting his designs to be super sexualized.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some places that you can kind of see that, other places not so much, like Yang. But the other three girls of RWBY, they aren't what I'd call super sexualized.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Personally, the most overtly sexualized character that I think there is in terms of, overall design and to a significantly lesser extent attitude, but I still think it's somewhat there, is absolutely Yang. Where, her character design itself is just the stereotypical, pin-up blonde.
Yeah, definitely.
This is true.
And she definitely took on a very flirtatious tone with Junior in her trailer, but that may have just been her deliberately playing that up for the whole effect of the moment.
And also the trailers did have kind of, they had some disparities with what would come with the show later, just because, you look at the Red trailer and, you don't catch any of RWBY's character from the actual show. It was kind of like a set off to the side thing. So even when the volumes actually started, Yang, the design was still there, but the personality kind of flew. There's still the little hints of it here and there, but she's not an overly flirtatious, overly sexualized character.
Right.
But let me ask you this: you do have to kind of make the discrepancy between when is it overly sexualized and when is it this is the character, right? Like, I think something like that's going to vary person to person, right? Like, I would say personally that I don't necessarily find Pyrrha or Yang or many of the other characters, or at least Pyrrha and Yang, I don't necessarily find them over their outfits or their designs overly sexualized. I think Yang's attitude definitely comes from a more sexualized manner, right? Like, it's more, driven towards that kind of humor and that kind of, personality. But I do think that's inherently a part of the character. And I also would say that, over time, Yang has changed in that regard somewhat as well, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
You don't really catch much of that in the last couple of volumes. We haven't really caught much of that.
Mm-hmm.
No. And even from between the Yellow trailer and all the early volumes, you can really see this difference. A lot of people had thought of Yang as a bimbo, more or less, and we haven't seen that. Some people think they've seen it, but I'm just gonna flat out say they're wrong.
Yeah, that's a
Y'all
topic
clearly
for
haven't been
another
reading. Never mind.
podcast.
Yes. Okay.
We cannot summon them.
I mean, it's never too late for Yang to make a penetrated joke to Weiss. Or Cinder.
Jesus.
It's never too late. It's never too soon.
Mm.
Mm.
You were all thinking it.
Yes.
I'm just the only one brave enough to say it.
Yeah, you're the only one who's enough of a degenerate to say it.
If I may actually respond to something that Demon Wolf brought up.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to Pyrrha, and specifically in regards to being over-sexualized, I would actually say that she is over-sexualized for what she is, because she, honestly, her role in the story, as far as I am concerned. Now, mind you, it has been many years since I rewatched seasons 1 through 3.
Mm-hmm.
But as I remember, she's pretty much just there to be a cute, wholesome romance, almost a cardboard cutout for Jean in a lot of ways.
She's the cardboard cutout Obi-Wan Kenobi for John, basically.
Exactly. So I don't really see a whole lot of reason for her to have the up to the very, very high on the thigh boots, the very tight corset, the very prominent bust,
Mm-hmm.
Especially when those things aren't exactly practical in combat.
This is true.
This is like, I'm not going to get into this right now, but I could harp on the whole practicality of that outfit for hours. In fact, I think y'all have been there when I have before. It's, I agree with
Lexi.
Welcome
to the Drowsiness Podcast.
I'm on the third mood of Jupiter right now. I agree with Lexi on that, definitely. Like, okay, kind of coming back around to the main topic, I don't really think any character, personality-wise, is very sexualized, but certain characters have designs that kind of emphasize the sexual aspect. Like, even, even outside of just blatant, TNA sexuality. Like, this is me getting a little philosophical here, but, Yang, all of her designs are very, for lack of a better word, butch. They kind of scream the strong female archetype,
Yeah.
Right.
Which is something that is innately, sexualized in a way. Like, I wouldn't say it's 100%, a fetish thing, but, like, it plays to that sort of desirable setup, that desirable stereotype.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, let me ask you this then. Let me ask all of you this. Like, we've given our answer on whether or not we think RWBY, at least when it started out, was sexualized or not. So do we think that's an okay thing? Do we think that's a bad thing? Do we think they should have changed that and made it different? Or do we think how it turned out was possibly the best they could have done?
I feel just kind of how our culture is, you always have something that is taken in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just even if it's not in the show, outside of it, it will be taken and made sexualized, correct?
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
The internet
I mean,
proves
there's all
this.
those-
We've all been on DeviantArt once or twice.
Yeah.
But no,
I
I think it's fine actually. Like the show has a healthy balance. You know, sexuality and sexualization isn't a bad thing inherently,
Yeah, sure.
but you know, if you want to watch hentai or some shit, go watch hentai, you know. Like
Fair.
RWBY does a very good job of balancing, you know, the character designs and character attitudes with the actual tone that the show was trying to set. Like in the
Yeah.
early volumes where it was a little bit more lighthearted with kind of a air of there's danger, you know, but it's kind of almost like a slice of life anime, but with a little bit of, like, best I can compare it to is like early Boku no Hero Academia, like is how the earlier volumes felt. And even now,
sure there's bad guys, but they're over there.
yeah. And now
Mhm.
even with from volume 4 on with the much more serious threats, you know, everything is balanced out really well. Like I can't complain on it.
So like there's times to explore one's sexuality, but it has to work within the story it's in, and RWBY doesn't exactly fit that as of right now. So we're not exactly going to see that, and we probably shouldn't see that, right?
I mean, it would definitely, you know, take away from
But it would
the
feel out of
mood
place, right?
now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if it's during like a beach episode or some comedy gag episode or something like that, like I could understand it, but like, you know, say during volume 6 when they're at John's sister's place when Oscar goes missing, you know, and then there's a boob joke thrown in out of nowhere. Like that would be really uncomfortable.
No,
You
man.
just feel like that doesn't go there. You know, RWBY
Yeah.
doesn't do stuff like that, and that's
Well, something that's very similar along that lines is, like, I very distinctly remember when Volume 3 was first coming out. Like, I was very, very active in the fandom on Tumblr, and I didn't have First at the time, but I still saw that clip of, oh, she's with the bimbo, when Emerald said that. And I distinctly remember being very, very surprised that RWBY would use language like that, because up until that point, RWBY felt like, yes, Yang and Pyrrha had sexualized designs, but it felt normal within the context of the show, and at that point, that felt like the most out and out blatant example.
yeah, because you know it's normal for like youth television. Like, you know, if you've ever watched a Butch Hartman cartoon, you know, there's the whole trope of the Hartman hips. You know, there's fan service and, you know, undertones of sexuality in almost all media these days, but RWBY was never like really in your face with it, so I can see where that comes as pretty surprising.
Yes, kids,
Right,
go
I think-
back to some of those old cartoons and watch. There are so many sexual innuendos in there that you will absolutely lose your mind. There are so many.
Y'all, let me tell you, nothing will destroy your childhood more than going back and rewatching Rugrats in Paris and realizing,
Yes.
oh, this is funny.
Yes.
you just drink
That
a little
one.
bit beforehand,
Oof.
you're like, wow.
They had to make it so that the parents had to be entertained as well, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's why those jokes are there, right? Like, you're going to be watching it with your kids, so this is for the parents. But it definitely does, I think, kind of give off that, you know, like, going back and realizing, oh my god, my entire childhood was just nothing but sex jokes, and I never knew. But back to the topic.
Right.
Jelo, go
Yeah,
ahead.
back to RWBY. I feel that it does do a pretty good job of not being in your face with that sexuality. You don't have these interesting camera angles. I think there was maybe one in Volume 6. Other than
Anti-upskirt technology. Praise Monty, am I right?
Mhm.
I do think, though, there's a difference between sexualized designs and like blatant fan service, right?
Well, I think in large part it also has to do with, like, so from within the context of, like, a Michael Bay Transformers film,
Mm-hmm.
a really fan servicey shot
Mm.
would not feel out of place and wouldn't necessarily be all that notable. But in the context of RWBY, given, like, the universe that we've had established to us and the very hard stance that the RWBY seems to be instigating of, these are underage kids, so we're not even going to think about like sex as much as possible, it would very much stand out. And I think if those did exist, we would notice them significantly more.
Yes.
And I respect them for also thinking about that kind of thing, because, it's something that you have to, especially nowadays, maybe in the early 2000s, it wouldn't have set off as many alarm bells in an audience, but we live in a very, I guess the best way to say it is very sexually conscious time period. So, if they mishandled the view and the handling of sexualization and sex in the show, it would be something that a lot of people pick up on. These were very sensitive to that kind of thing now.
It's interesting here you say sexually conscious, because I would say we live also in a much more sexually open time as of right now too, especially compared to the past, right?
Yeah, like you go back to the 1990s and you throw half the stuff we got on TV now, and the FCC would probably blow a gasket.
The FCC certainly, but I don't think necessarily the people. I think that I think people always look back and think that their parents are more prude than they really were, just
True.
because parents feel the need to be prude around children.
I mean,
True.
yes.
This is true. Well, moving on though, do we think the sexualization of RWBY has changed over time? Like, getting past the beginning of RWBY in the first couple of volumes in the trailer, looking at the later volumes, probably more at volumes 4, 5, and 6 and onwards. Do we think that RWBY has become more sexualized, or do we think RWBY has become less sexualized in its designs and characters and character personalities and attitudes and all of that?
Less. Definitely less.
I would say the same.
I mean, it's just, it's clear as day, smack you right in the face. I'm sorry, Jelo, go ahead.
Well, one thing that I'd say to counter that is, with the Volume 4 outfits, each of the girls has a boob window.
So this is going to sound really obsessive, what I'm about to say.
Hold up. Hold up.
Go ahead.
So I would radically disagree. I think the designs, particularly into Volume 4, became significantly more sexualized, with the exception of Yang during the first half of the said volume. Between RWBY, she got a shorter skirt. Her leggings were torn, which would draw the eye to that because it's a differentiation in color. Maybe it's just to break up. However, I will give it that could just be to break up the legs and make them look more noticeable in animation. All the characters do now have boob windows. That's a thing. In particular with RWBY, it's a very remarkable thing, because up until that point, she was by far the least sexual design. She was wearing boots, she was wearing leggings, always. It's not like Weiss, where she was wearing elegant heels and bare legs, which...
She was covered from head to toe except for her hands and her face.
Exactly. So I would say that they became more sexualized, and I haven't looked at them recently, but I think the Volume 6 outfits... Is it 6 or 7 we're going into?
7.
The Volume 7 outfits, they amplify that even further, although that could be just my own biases talking there.
Well,
So I would say, we do have to ask the question, right? Like, is that okay still? Because, these are teenagers, these are teenage characters. You do have to keep in mind, right, of what a teenager, what that character would like to wear, and how they might change and grow up confidence-wise and everything else, right?
right.
Well, in particular...
Lexi, go ahead.
In particular with RWBY, I don't see it as a negative thing, because the outfits themselves are a way for the creators to communicate an aging, to communicate an increase in maturity with that character.
Oh, yeah.
And you use sexuality to broadcast maturity. So an increase in sexuality of the clothes that a character is willing to wear indicates to the audience that this character has naturally become more mature.
Okay.
Yeah, and to go along with that, I feel that it is just kind of these kids are growing up and uh, exploring, perhaps we could say, what they were comfortable with and all that. And we even see a little bit about that with Blake when Gira says, you're not covering all that much, and Blake's like, no, it's fine.
Fair.
More proof that he's best dad.
Many would disagree with that, it seems, unfortunately, but I agree with you.
Disgusting human beings. I'll fight all of them. Let me just take a little bit more NyQuil and I'll be good. Let's go.
Dull the pain.
We gonna be in the Andromeda Galaxy by the time I'm done here.
Yeah, we should, but we should ask. What about the male characters? We've kind of taken a more focus on the female characters. But what about the male characters within RWBY, though?
Well,
there's only one really sexualized male character that I can think of.
I can think of two. Maybe a third one?
Okay. Maybe two, and that's if I stretch to the philosophical side of it again. Okay, on the physical side, just we gotta address the elephant in the room right off the bat. Sun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was established pretty early on to be kind of the male fan service character, like the sort of across the bow equivalent to Yang. He's always got the ab window all the way through to his last appearance in the show.
Well, he didn't ever change his outfit.
Yeah, but like, I feel like that says something. His design has always been the handsome, rugged, roguish guy, and that's a sort of sexualized stereotype. He fits in it like a glove. And if we're getting to the philosophical stuff, well, actually, while I'm thinking about it, there are bit characters that have more, more focused male sexuality designs. There's what's his name? He's on Sun's team. The
Sage?
green dude. Sage. Yeah, he has the completely open trench coat.
Right.
There's
well, correct me if I'm wrong, but Team Sun was supposed to be kind of based around the idea of a boy band, correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of what's going on there.
It's a K-pop group, isn't it? Big Bang or something?
Like, I think they were specifically based on, like, one K-pop band, weren't they?
I'm pretty sure it's Big Bang, but I'm not sure. I hate K-pop, and I only know this one thing about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't know either.
Alright, it's not really that. Yeah, it's Big Bang. Alright, so... Yeah, they all have sort of a... Except for Neptune, they have designs that draw attention to the more attractive parts of the male physique.
Right.
We brought up Tai Yang yet?
Not yet.
No. But before we do,
Yeah, he's up there too. I didn't think about
I would
Tai.
like to just say about Sun that his outfit does work a lot with just who he is. He is very open and confident, etc., etc. So I feel that works for him, especially coming from Vacuo.
Yeah, that definitely fits the character too.
Alright, so, while Tai Yang is wearing the definition of a dad outfit...
And we love him for it.
He definitely... Excuse me. He definitely seems to have some air of sexuality about him. But maybe that's just because of, like, the societal relationship between, big muscles equals sexy, Because, like, the dude's buff, but he's unusually so. He's more buff than most everybody except for Sage and Sun in the show. Like, even amongst the Hunter characters that we have established, he's very swole.
No, he's bigger than Sun, I think. Like, design-wise, I think he's actually bigger than him. I think it's, like, Hazel's the biggest. And then you got Tai and then everybody else.
I think, but with Tai, though, that is... I would assume that would tie into his combat. Because with Yang, you'd think it's very punchy.
I still want to know what his weapon is. Because didn't they say it's not gauntlets?
We'll get it at some point. I refuse to believe we won't.
Gimme.
Well,
it's going to be after his daughter dies.
I suppose we've kind of already answered this question a little bit, but we can go into it just to be clear, I suppose. Do we think that this, increase in sexualization, since I think most of us agreed that that we've definitely seen RWBY increase in sexualization to some degree, at least with some characters. Lexi did kind of already answer this question, as I said, but do the rest of us think that this is a sign of the of the show maturing?
Yeah.
It could be taken that way, yeah.
I mean, it's
I would definitely. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Nah, go. I'm good.
I would definitely say like the change we've seen in Yang's character shows a sign of maturing, and at the very least, it shows a sign of the characters changing. Right, as Lexi said, it does show a sign of the characters growing older and exploring more. Right, exploring what they like, what they dislike, what they're willing to wear, and how they're willing to show themselves. Right. I would say to some degree, at the very least, it shows that. It shows them growing and learning as teenagers do.
Alright, well, what I was going to say is I don't think it's so much showing that, or as it's a result of that, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's more the effect instead of the cause.
I wouldn't say that. Say like it's not really a cause. It's more of a byproduct than the actual, end result. It's just something that happened along the way because the characters are getting more mature. Miles and Carrie have, you can debate this till the sun comes down, but I think that they have done a very good job of showing the characters, especially Yang, growing more mature.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they've definitely, you look at the characters back in Volume 1 through 3, Yang is the aggressive, solve every problem with brute force, including the ones that don't need brute force at all. Ruby's happy-go-lucky, kind of...
It's been tempered.
Irresponsible, almost. And, you get into we're in Volume 6, just getting out of Volume 6, Ruby is shaping up to be the leader of the team, like, stepping into that role more comfortably. Yang is, like, kind of the backbone of the team now, I'd say.
I thought lesbianism was the backbone of the team.
No, that's the glue.
Be quiet, you fool. You'll awaken them.
Well, moving right on, I think this is definitely the one that's going to get the most discussion. Do we think the fandom might be at fault for how RWBY is perceived? Either, do we think the overtly sexualized nature of some fan content, whether it be fan art or fan fiction, is okay? Like, is this something that we as a fandom should be okay with? Is it something that we should embrace more, or is it something that we should be more against even? Who would like to go first?
I'll go.
I have a great deal of thoughts.
But you can go. You've got your thoughts in a row.
Go.
All right, so yes, in a word, yes. The fandom has, especially to people outside of the fandom is like the single most responsible thing for the perception of RWBY being a very sexy show. This fandom is quite possibly the second most horny fandom I've ever been a part of. That's coming from the guy who, as of March of last year, had every piece of RWBY lewd fan art downloaded on their hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
All of them. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it's very interesting considering of all the shows that Rooster Teeth has, this is the one that has by far the most not safe for work, not just porn, but like all kinds of content, ecchi, what have you, and also by far the most just absolutely disgusting controversies in the fandom alone, and so frequently all the time. I think there's some sort of correlation there, but yeah.
I can explain this in one word. One phrase, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Western animation.
Right. I think that is...
Welcome. We're basically in an anime that's not an anime, technically. So, for some reason, like, shows like Avatar, The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra, Western shows that take a more anime spin. Like, I don't know if there's a particular reason for it, but in my experience, like, those fandoms are they're like the worst parts and most, not so,
intense?
Okay, the worst isn't the
Extreme?
right word. It's like the most intense parts of like the anime fandoms all in one place. Like, you know how people get on the JoJo fandom for getting a little bit heated. I'd say the RWBY fandom's pretty far up there, you know. I think it's more a byproduct of the medium than the show itself.
Yeah, I'll definitely say, right, coming into RWBY, having been in other fandoms that were way more chill about their shipping scenes, or I think, and I don't necessarily mean in terms of like getting upset about different ships or anything like that. I mean, when I say more chill, I mean the ships they had were very few compared to what RWBY has, and some of those fandoms had way more characters to deal with and to ship if you wanted to. Like, I stand by my statement. RWBY is the first fandom I've ever gotten into where I've seen this many characters shipped together in so many different relationships, right?
I'm pretty sure there's something for literally every character shipped together.
If there's not, there will be, or it's... Yeah, there will be, or it exists very quietly.
This is my soapbox. Give me more Pyrrha Ren fan art now.
Yes,
it's one of those things. It's almost a rule of the internet at this point, where if RWBY introduces a new character, there will be shipping art of it, even if it's just a recolor of fucking Nora. I'm looking at you, Twitter.
Maria, though? Maria? Who?
There's probably...
I've seen the art.
Version.
Don't.
But... yeah.
And he's not talking about young Maria.
No, I'm not. Jesus. I'm surprised by... I'm kind of surprised by that, and yet I'm kind of not surprised by that.
I mean,
why would you be? We're literally a dumpster fire.
This is true. This is true. I mean, yeah, getting into it, yeah, I would say, right, like, there's definitely a perception of, even when you look at non-pornographic content, even when you look at content that is generally more safe for work, like there is in some of that fan art, like you can find the different characters in somewhat provocative poses, or even wearing provocative outfits, right? Like, I love Mojojo's art, right? But he does draw the characters in outfits or in clothes that are sometimes have sexualized connotations with them, right? Like, there's no way to disconnect that. Like, I love the art. Most of his art is generally adorable and cute, and I love seeing it. But most of it does have, like, you drew them in bunny outfits. Wonder why.
Or, you played every character in RWBY in a maid outfit.
Yeah. Like, you know, like, yeah, there's definitely connotations there. There's no denying that. And which I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. Like, let's be clear.
What do you mean there's sexual connotations behind a virgin killer? What do you mean?
And I mean...
But I think, even beyond lewd, this goes, like, further into, like, even some of the more shocking art, where there's a lot of there's semi-sexual connotations to it. Like, Hiwa Noafu, for example, is probably one of the most universally reviled artists in the fandom. Just because of, like, two pieces in particular I can think of off the top of my head. But those both, despite their very shocking content, are almost totally non-sexual and yet very intensely sexual at the same time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Their fetish art is what you're telling me.
Well, kind of, if eyeball removal is a fetish.
I mean, there's somebody that gets off to that, which is a horrible thing to say, but yeah, that's a thing. I've been on the dark corners of the internet.
Yeah,
don't ask me where I've been. I don't want to go back there again.
Drink more cough syrup.
No. Dull the pain and the memories. Jelo, thoughts?
Not really.
Throwing you in the deep end. Fair.
Yeah, sorry, that was last minute here, so I'm not prepared.
This is also true.
I can drink more cough syrup and ramble for a few minutes.
But
okay.
There's a piece of the question that you asked that I don't think we've really addressed. No, I might be skipping ahead here, so I apologize if I am. As to whether or not we should embrace this like perception shift, I think it's a matter of moderation.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think, especially since it makes the creators themselves uncomfortable when it's brought up, in like fan meets and podcasts and the like. I don't necessarily think it's the kindest thing for us as a fandom to be enforcing sexuality onto the RWBY, but at the same time, I personally feel that it's like a stifling of artistic expression in particular, and in general, like how people perceive the art that is RWBY itself. If we were to go out and say, no, stop the sexualization of these characters wholesale, period, no exceptions.
I mean, you also have to think, like, how would we handle fan fiction, right? Like, because there are, there's fanfics that are outright people who wrote porn, right? And then there's fanfics that are sexual, but they're not sexualized, right? Like, they go into either the sexuality of the characters, or they just put the characters in relationships. And I do get, right, where the show's creators come from. Like, they don't want to think about that. They don't want to deal with that because they are, grown adults, mostly men, who are writing female teenagers, right? And it's kind of,
and here's the thing,
how do you reconcile that? How do you kind of deal with that, right?
Demon, you're speaking over Jelo.
I know.
Nah,
Oh, wait.
that was
Sorry,
glucose.
Go ahead.
No?
Someone had a thought. Go ahead.
I was saying that a big part of what makes this different compared to other fandoms is that, there's super sexualized sections of any fandom. I've been into anime and stuff for years, and, even like Western animation shows, like Voltron and stuff like that, they have a really sexualized side of the fandom. The thing about RWBY is that Rooster Teeth, they aren't, a few guys in a company basement anymore, but they are still comparatively, they're not Funimation, they're not KyoAni Studio or nothing like that. They are a very small, comparatively creative team, and they also engage with the fandom a lot, so they're going to be seeing a lot more of this than, say, the guys behind like Dragon Ball Z or Naruto or stuff like that they're going to see. They don't see probably nearly as much of that as RT does. So the fandom does have, I think, more of an effect on this as compared to normal as in like bigger properties. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing when, like you said, when it gets shoved in the creators' faces and it takes away from the creative medium that it's based on.
Okay.
Because I write fan fiction like the worthless degenerate that I am.
I think we all do.
Welcome to the club.
But yeah, we are all degenerates on this blessed day. But it's something that's, and even what y'all were talking about earlier with certain artists, what Liz was talking about, Mojo does work for RWBY now, from my understanding. He works with the Crewbie on stuff for the chibi sketches.
Maybe?
Right? I think I remember it was him and another artist got dragged in on that. Oh,
Dish, I know, definitely did some Genlock stuff.
Too. Yeah, Dish is doing Genlock stuff now too. Yeah, I don't follow Genlock, so
Dish is doing Genlock stuff, and I think so is Lucaris.
Lucaris?
That threw me.
Okay.
Lucaris of all people.
It might have just been a one-off thing for the Scottish girl, though. I don't recall.
That does bring up an interesting question, though, because Dish, he's done actual work for Rooster Teeth and concept art and stuff like that, and yet he's also drawn some of these characters in a sexualized manner sometimes. Is that okay? Since this was someone who technically helped with the creation of the character originally.
I think it would be, yeah. I mean, all this, the fandom stuff and all of us drawing art and writing fics, I don't think it's ever a really bad thing to truly do this, because I do feel that Crewy won't, and the rest of RT won't let this affect them. They're a bit, beyond that, you know? So for us,
Yeah.
it's just kind of us exploring things and being creative and having an outlet.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's been a long damn time since the first drawing of Tex and Church going at it was sent their way.
Yeesh.
I can only imagine the look on Bernie's face. He just sees this and just looks around. He's like, "Oh God."
Hmm.
They'd still have their helmets on so they're recognizable.
Oh God.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I suppose, right? Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add?
Just one more thing,
Sure.
and it might be a bit
No,
unpopular.
we're
Oh, I
There,
love
under
hot takes.
no circumstance is it wrong for somebody to take these characters that have been created, this world that has been created, and to add their own spin on it. Whether that be, I don't know, like Jean the Conqueror. I'm not going to elaborate. You can fucking Google it.
I don't want to.
Or that be a very elaborate, very in detail, very in depth AU like RWBY 3.0. There is no circumstance where that is immoral, and in my personal opinion, the only immoral thing that could come of that is if RT were to actively start telling people to stop.
Yeah, like, because there are some authors and properties that, not really many big ones, because, a lot of big companies, can't be bothered by it, but certain writers, like, I know J.D. Ely, I think, is one of them. They're like, hey, I will sue you if you make fan work of my property. Like, just any kind of fan work, I don't think that's right either.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think
Because artistic expression, I think there are and should be some legal limits. Like, I don't think that and this is a really dodgy line because there's a whole debate about this with anime with doujins and stuff. I don't think that if a writer isn't trying to infringe on the business of the original property, then I feel like a fan work should be fine. Like, even profiting off of it a little bit. Like, if a guy, I know fan fiction and stuff, like, they don't allow, Patreon doesn't allow that, but, Kerr, as much as I am disgusted by his existence and wish to slapbox him, I think he has a right, and it's not immoral for him to run a Patreon. It's like, hey, donate to me and I'll write more, because I can make writing a full-time thing. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Jelo, thoughts?
Nope.
So I'll add, right, like I do agree. I think there's nothing wrong with any creator taking from an original work and putting their own spin to it and doing what they wish to do with it and having fun, right, and enjoying themselves. Like, I think that's the big thing. As long as you're having fun and enjoying yourselves doing what you're doing, I think that creation is a good thing. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it, and there never should be anything inherently wrong with it. And even if it gets into or goes into a not safe for work area, or it explores a facet of characters that the original creators are unwilling to do or just don't feel comfortable doing, if that person does and they wish to do that, then I think they have the right to do that. They should be allowed to do that, right? I think the only problem, personally, when it becomes a problem is when that person starts pushing back against the creators or against other people and saying that my interpretation is the only correct interpretation, right? When you uphold your interpretation as this is the one that we should be following, not the original, not the one the original creators have made, then I think you've pushed too far. I think that
And that's why
you've gone too far.
That kind of falls
Yeah,
under
yeah,
what I was
absolutely.
talking about infringing on business. Yeah, like, as long as the creator is not, like, if the work is not infringed upon, and I'm not talking copyright infringement, I'm talking, like, if you are not trying to force the work to bend to you, then I think anything
And that's
should
why
be
there's
okay.
so many fan works that go off saying, I don't own RWBY, go watch it, all that, etc. And that's why that's there. And you can even argue
Well-
that in a way these fan works actually help RWBY in the rest of the products by it's effectively free advertising.
Yeah.
I would have never played a Star Fox game if it weren't for me reading fanfic. So
I mean, I only got into RWBY through fan fiction, believe it or not. So yeah, like fan work did have a huge part in it. It was it's a long story, and I won't bore anyone with the details. But yeah, like fan art does, it adds something to it. Fan art, fan work, stuff like that. It adds something to the community.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the only downside is everyone who comes into RWBY from fan fiction is just going to come in with the thought that there's just going to be a ton of lesbian subtext
Right,
everywhere,
fanon.
and there's kind of not. But
Or you can be like me and think that Pyrrha was going to live for more than 3 volumes.
how? She was a cardboard cutout more than sun.
Don't judge me, okay? I'm weak for wholesome but also tough women.
this is fair. This is completely fair.
Valid.
You're goddamn right.
Well, is that all? Anything else we'd like to add?
Nope.
I'm out.
More Pyrrha Ren fan art and fan fiction, or I start beating myself. I don't know. I mean it. Anyone who's listening, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Glucose's
So help me God, I will shoot this cat.
Glucose's odd hostage/begging situation aside, that has been all for the Cacophony. We do hope you enjoy, and
Please excuse me. Family just came home.
Just in time for us to kick
Okay.
you out.
well, with that said, if you wish to find us anywhere, my entire train of thought's been lost now. If you wish to find us, come check out the Crow's Nest Discord. There will be a link to that in the description below. You can talk with all of us here, as well as many other cool and awesome people on the Crow's Nest Discord. Go check it out. That has been the Cacophony. I have been your host, Wolf, for this week. We do hope you've enjoyed, and I was joined by...
Me, Jelo, with my interrupting family.
Me, Lexi, with the interrupting steak fries.
And me, Glucose, with the interrupting glucose.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.